We'll introduce the table in a sec, but let me explain how these sessions work. I watched the entire FT. I picked a bunch of hands that I thought were either interesting or that I wanted to hear Samu's opinion on. Then we're going to review them together. I may pick hands where he has a clear decision, but we still want to talk about the entire range. My goal is to pick hands where there's some kind of takeaway, whether it's a theory takeaway or an exploitative one. Hopefully, by the end, the goal for the audience is to sharpen your ICM knowledge and to hear our thoughts on what we think is best in today's current landscape. This was a pretty interesting final table. So this is a 100K buy-in, happened in September in Jeju. This is the main event. So I'll let you describe the players and then we'll get into the hands.
At the very top of this list, you can see right now on the left-hand side, a very familiar name. A couple familiar names, actually. Christopher Vogelsang, Alex Ponakos, Ben Heath are very familiar faces. Even Zhu Liang to some degree, but probably people don't know them. Yeah, Christopher Vogelsang, very good cash game, well, like very good tournament player that has a cash game background and yeah, leans slightly more passive. GTO approach kind of doesn't, yeah, fight for every pot kind of player, but very good and well studied. Alex Ponakos, in my opinion, maybe the best player right now. Very elite, super aggressive, very present during play, plays a lot of online, one of the best, and very nice to share the stage with him. Ben Heath, another well-studied GTO approach kind of player, also leans more like doesn't go for like crazy exploits or anything, just plays his hand most of the time, his range very well, but doesn't go after you in some spots. Also very good player, super nice guy too. And yeah, Xu Liang, I have played a little bit with someone who can be aggressive, but has his kind of moods and also plays the player kind of guy. Yeah, all the others are a little bit wild cards. There's one guy very tight. I'm confusing the names probably right now, but seed 3 it was pretty tight player, and then the guy to Vogelsang's right was crazy. Like he was just going after it, like three betting every hand, playing huge pots
I think
against chip
it's
leader.
Wu
Yeah,
is the aggressive one.
yeah, he's absolutely wild. Chips were flying around the table with that guy being on the table, so there was some incentive to be tighter first in some spots, etc. Pretty wild guy. And the guy next to him, to his right, that one, he was like, whatever, no special reads. Leaning slightly tight, I would say. Yeah, that's the lineup.
Let's get into hands. Yeah, I watched the FT, like you said. There wasn't a lot of interesting stuff until final six. I actually didn't pick any hands, nine-handed. Three of these players are going to be eliminated, but luckily, most of the guys that are final six are guys that you actually know and gave some feedback on. And then the other thing I would say, this player plays very out of line in a lot of spots. So I did pick a hand to hear how you approach playing against this player, but it'll be a bit later in the session. But
It's
just
good.
give everyone background. Okay, so firsthand, actually, I mean, because I'll say it now, it wasn't meant to be on purpose, but you could kind of take away from the session like how to play the big blind on FTs, because I think like five or six of the hands were you in the big blind and a couple multi-way. So let's start with this one. Multi-way defense is tricky in ICM scenarios. So I'll explain the situation and then get your thoughts, and then we see sim, like we'll do that flow. I know it's kind of hard to see the stack sizes. Can you see them, Samu, at least?
Yeah, if I move a little bit forward with my head, it's
Okay.
possible.
Yeah, I didn't know whether to make it big. I wanted to show the actual
Yeah,
image,
yeah.
but it's easier to convert. It's up to you guys in the chat how you view it. The action goes Pondikov's open, Vogelsang call on the button, so cutoff button, and then Samu's in the big blind with six players left. So you can basically see cutoff was 47 bigs and button covered with 80, and Samu's the shortest with 15. So how do you approach this spot, not just with your hand, but with your range? What hands are you shoving? How wide are you defending? These are the kind of things I'm looking for.
Here I'm clear shortest stack. One thing to realize instantly is that the button's playing fairly deep against the cutoff. All these other guys have a similar stack. A 50 BB stack does some damage to an 80 BB stack, even though the 80 BB stack covers. So there's some risk premium, and the in position player is gonna have quite some strong hands in his flatting range too. I expect something to 10 show up here quite frequently, and everything worse. So like it feels like jacks mainly probably 3-bet, but can potentially also flats a little bit. Ace king as a value threshold for the button. Whenever I'm in the big blind, I do not get to jam like crazy wide. I think I want to shove a linear range and to have equity if I get called. Hands that come to mind are like stronger pairs. I don't think I get to jam every pair. I'm not sure, but I don't think I get to shove the weak pairs because of the strong range the in position flatter still has. I mean, he flats wide, but he has also some strong hands in there. So I wouldn't shove every pair. I think I probably shove something like pocket eights for sure, and then like sevens, I'm not sure about. I want to shove broadways, suited, and something like ace. A suited ace is also not that easy. Probably like ace jack suited for sure, ace 10 suited probably. And then offsuit, I would shove ace jack off. It's probably something like ace jack off, ace 10 suited, pocket
Mhm.
sevens probably. Maybe eight.
Worst hand you would like defend passively, you think? What's the rough border?
I think I'm clear shortest, but I still think I need to be somewhat tight. I think I get to fold some suited hands, the worst ones, the ones that don't make straights. Offsuit, I think we need to be careful. I was too wide for a very long time with these offsuit gap connectors, like 6-5 off, 7-6 off. I defended too often in these ICM scenarios, something I paid attention to lately. I cannot defend these. I would say something like Jack 10 off, I call, Jack 9 off, Queen 10 off, Queen 9, I don't know, King 8, I don't know. Like that's where the hands were, I
Okay.
just don't know.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I like that key part of your thought process here
Oh,
is
and
like,
and I also want to shove probably queens, I don't know, and then just induce kings.
okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say I like the thought process from you, and this is important for people to understand is like, what do these ranges look like? And maybe how are they a bit different than normal? So cutoff should be opening tighter than normal with two covering stacks behind and a shorty. But button covers, but also doesn't want to go broke, like you said, with a hand like jacks. So the button is flatting wide, but also has a lot more strong hands compared to chip EV. And that's going to affect the types of hands you can shove. The button's a lot less capped than they are in chip EV, I would say. Therefore, gets to call more when you shove, something you have to be aware of. I like the way you constructed your range. I asked the chat to try and guess as well. We got some answers. For 56 people, though, not too many answers. Okay, let's see some results. This is cutoff RFI. Yeah, 27%, like nothing crazy. Tighter than chip EV. Kind of already mentioned reasons why. This is how the button plays. So kind of like what we didn't analyze this range, but they get to call very wide, being the covering stack. So yeah, nothing crazy, just like a polar three bet, bluff heavy, and lots of flatting with the middling stuff. Kind of what you'd expect. And then your strategy versus the raise call. So I'd say you did very well. You called this one. Threshold
Mm.
somewhere around ace nine, sixes, ace jack. You also mentioned that a hand like queen 10 suited is preferred over a suited ace x. How much equity you have when this player calls? They call their 10, their nines, eights, tens. It's a little better to have queen jack suited than a hand like ace seven suited versus the calling range of the button. Very tight in the defense. You're close. I think you said queen 10 off.
Maybe it was me being scared of king queen in that spot because I would not have known what I would do. It's like close, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's mixing, so.
Yeah.
I wish I pulled up a Chippy V sim, but Chippy V looks insanely different in terms of I mean, shoving's not that much different. You do still shove linear, but the defense would be like way, way, way wider. The last thing I want to mention is like an interesting ICM dynamic that I wish I ran. Maybe I'll run it after. If these stacks were reversed, I would be very curious in the big blind strategy because what happens in this spot is cutoff has to check a lot, button gets to bet a lot, and you're screwed post flop in this scenario. If you reverse the stacks, it actually goes cutoff check a lot, button check a lot. And that's actually better for you and your equity realization. So I think you could defend wider if they were reversed, but I'd be curious to test that.
That's very interesting. It's
Yeah.
probably true because that's also something that I learned from Yuri Prelek coaching, which I kind of want to touch on now, so you're saying it, is
There's
that like we as MTT players, when we study, pre-flop is so important. And when we see risk premiums and how tight ranges get, we mainly start from pre-flop, thinking about like, oh, okay, we have this added risk on our head pre-flop. That's why we need to be so tight. In a lot of these spots, a solver tries to defend his range properly by the river, like close to MDF, even in high risk premium situations. All this overfolding happens earlier, and you need added equity on these earlier streets. With you needing 15% more equity on turns and rivers, you now need stronger hands in your range to defend against certain bet sizes on these future streets. So something I like that was eye-opening to me as most others started thinking about pre-flop, then the flop, turns, and then rivers, but actually thinking about rivers, how you're able to defend your range properly, you end up having to defend strong hands pre-flop in your flatting range or whatever it is. So yeah, something to consider, and that helped me think about the game in a slightly different way, which I think is a great learning to have. And that's why I think you're right about us potentially over-realizing in the other spot and therefore getting to defend wider.
and you'd face a wider button, like a wider cutoff. I think it works in your favor. I'll run it after and I can share it in the Discord just to see when we switch those stacks what happens. That's great advice for everyone.
I really hope you enjoyed this video piece. If you want to get more of it and get your game to the next level, then join us at Team Pokercode.